So before we begin, I'm going to turn over these proceedings and our panel to our moderator, Dr. John Jackson. I would like to say a bit about Dr. Jackson because he very rarely will say much about himself. So this may be the most you will ever hear about Dr. Jackson. Dr. John L. Jackson teaches in the Black Studies program and the Department of Religion, and cross-list courses with the Department of Anthropology, Sociology. John considers himself to be a true interdisciplinarian, teaching courses as broadly arrayed as rebellion, resistance, and Black religion, social justice movements among peoples of color, new religious movements, sects, and cults. And that's my Oklahoma accent and list. So that was sex, X-E-T-C-T, not S-E-X. I do not want to misrepresent my colleague. And Dr. Jackson pioneered a new course for Black Studies, Video, Race, and Rights, which now is on our books and taught by one of our guest panelists this semester. Dr. Jackson's research interests also span an interdisciplinary spectrum with published articles on such topics as whiteness in the Black Studies classroom and a critique entitled The Discourse of Diversity and Inclusion, as well as an article or book chapter, Obama, Black Religion, and the Reverend Wright Controversy. So please welcome all of our panelists, which will be introduced by Dr. Jackson and our moderator. Thank you, and we will take about an hour today for this event, unless you are just so excited about our conversation, you hang out and stay longer to talk.
So thank you, Dr. King, and thank you for coming this afternoon. Wakanda forever is the cry that those who have found themselves caught up in the spectacle of the film Black Panther. The film is now smashing all box office records. At last tally, it has amassed close to $1 billion in box office sales worldwide, and as much as 500 million domestically and still counting. And this is only in the last 3 weeks. I mean, it's been out a little over 3 weeks. The Marvel superhero film is not just a record-breaking blockbuster, but thus far, it is the cultural event of the year. It is not clear to me, as an amateur analyst, just how many ideological compromises filmmakers have to make when they seek to balance socially conscious messaging with box office appeal. The box office appeal of Black Panther is unmistakable with its futuristic special effects, Marvel superhero scenes, and a talented cast of people of color that seem to debunk the myth that women in starring roles do not appeal to and attract teenage boys and men, and that people of color have no appeal abroad. Yet progressive Black voices in the Twitter world accuse the filmmakers of advancing a conservative political agenda by vilifying Killmonger, of the one true black revolutionary figure in the film. The question for me is whether or not film success must forever rely upon the communication of a regressive political message. Perhaps this tension between movie-making success and revolutionary political messaging can be one of the issues that we get into in the question and answer period, or maybe some of the panelists might venture to take it on. But for now, let me introduce the panel. As Tony said, we have only an hour, and I've instructed them to take no more than about 5 minutes or so to give their opening presentations, and then we'll have enough time for audience participation. Let me turn to Khadija Muhammad first, sitting in the center of our panel. She's a graduating senior from the South Side of Chicago, majoring in communication with a minor in anthropology, sociology, and music. Over the past 4 years, her leadership talents have made an outstanding impact in organizations such as the Black Student Union, the Tehillah a cappella group, and in Phi Kappa chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated. Currently, she is the chief minister of the BSU, president of Tehillah, and a president of Phi Kappa chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. She is also an officer in Lambda Pi Etna National Communication Honorary Society. Devoted to her community, she plans to attend graduate school in the near future on the path to obtaining a doctorate. She's still trying to make up her mind about what field. She's all over the curriculum in anthropology and Black studies and music, and she could go really in either direction, I would think. She's going to speak to themes having to do with national power and community involvement, the reversal of the dominant roles of white characters, and Afrofuturism. But I'd like to introduce the other members of the panel first, and Khadija will speak in turn. Terrence Dean, down on the end there, is a PhD candidate in homiletics and linguistics at Vanderbilt in the Graduate Department of Religion. His research interests include gender, sex, sexuality, Black religion, and homiletics, James Baldwin, rhetoric, communication, African diaspora, Black cultural studies, Afrofuturism. Terrence is a 2005 fellow from Vanderbilt. He also earned his master's in theology from Vanderbilt University Divinity School in May 2014. He has worked in the entertainment industry for over 15 years with heavy hitters such as Spike Lee, Rob Reiner, Keenan Ivory Wayans, and Angelica Houston. He has worked with television and film production companies such as BET, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers Pictures, Sony Pictures. He's also worked with MTV Networks for several years, helping to produce live award shows and events, including MTV Video Music Awards, movie awards, hip-hop honors, rock honors, sports and music festival, and Choose or Lose. Terrence has agreed to talk about rites and rituals, as well as race, gender, and masculinity in the context of the African American versus the African. Diana Maffei, sitting next to me, is an associate professor in Denison's English department, but also teaches courses that are cross-listed with Black Studies, Women's Studies, and International Studies. She has just published a new book, which she spoke on earlier today in the Tuesday luncheon. She is a frequent analyst on Black women. Her book is on Black women in speculative film and television, called Where No Woman Has Gone Before.
No black one.
No black woman has gone before. I stand corrected. As some of you will know who are Trekkies like I am, this is based on that slogan coming from that film. We have a few copies of the book on hand, do we?
We do.
We do.
Somewhere.
Okay.
Come talk to me.
So I'm sure many of you will be interested in purchasing an autographed copy after the panel discussion. Diana has agreed to talk about Black female characters in the Black Panther, which is obviously in keeping with her research, and I'm going to call upon her first to get us started.
All right, great. Thank you, John. So this is. Hello? Good? Is it on?
That one is stuff for sure.
Yeah. All right. We'll just share this. Thank you. How about now? Better? Okay, good. So I did not prepare polished remarks. I'm just going to share thoughts and impressions with you about the film, which I'm assuming that most of you have seen. Maybe show of hands if you have not seen it. That'll give me a, okay, just thought I'd check. So there may be spoilers in this, so that's a heads up for you. So some thoughts on the film. Maybe I'll start by saying that I am suspicious of hype. So before the film had been released, the expectation was very high, and critics who had previewed the film were really waxing poetic about it, right? And how amazing it was. It had something like a 98% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and so on. So it made me excited and hopeful, but also cautious, because I thought, is it that good? Can it be that good? And here's what I'll say. I thought it was excellent. So in many ways, it met my expectations. Not in every way, and I can talk more about that. I thought there were lapses, and that's true of pretty much, a film is rarely perfect, whatever that means to us. So as far as being a groundbreaking piece of cinema, absolutely. It's doing things we've never seen before. And as far as Black women, so let me keep it focused to the area I wanted to talk about. You have in that film multiple nuanced, complex, empowered Black women with agency. And it's rare enough to see one such Black woman in a speculative film, let alone 3 or 4 or 5. So in that sense, I thought it was amazing to take that many empowered Black women on screen and give them dialogue and screen time and roles and so on. As far as the narrative goes, I thought it was really important. It's called Black Panther. Black Panther is the superhero. It is his story. So yes, it does have a Black male protagonist, but his success and the success of Wakanda, which is a sort of, it's a hypothetical African utopia, it really hinges on the Black women in just about every possible way. And so that wasn't lost on me either, that he could not succeed without them. That was pretty clear. So that also is important. I'll say one other thing. Again, I'll keep it brief. I am still waiting and yes, I am a little biased, and this is the area that I'm interested in. I am still waiting to see if we will ever reach a point where we could have this kind of historical moment and this kind of film with a black female protagonist. So I think we've seen precursors to Black Panther in cinema, nothing on this scale, but we have seen black men in kind of superhero roles, title roles in speculative fiction, whether you want to think back to something like the Blade series, or Will Smith has done a number of sort of big blockbuster films that are science fiction. Denzel Washington was in the Book of Eli. So we've seen black men carry a mainstream science fiction or speculative fiction movie successfully. Again, not at this sort of level, but we've seen it. I don't think that's the case for black women. I'm not saying that you don't have sort of sporadic examples. You might say, okay, Halle Berry was Catwoman, but no, that's not. If we're talking about a film that is well written, well tailored, well acted, has a message, and that people go and see, to me that would be an interesting and amazing next step, was to say, could we pull this off with a black woman at the center? So that's where I'll end my comments.
Thank you, Diana. Deidre.
Okay. Hi guys. Black Panther really was astonishing in a lot of different ways. So what I kind of focused on, it was also like black womanhood representation, but for the sake of like community involvement and nation power. And I think just our millennial generation, but also like younger children, kind of seeing that and kind of like embodying that narrative was something like empowering to me. So even I think it was a video surfacing where it was like different girls who like they got I don't know how they got the costumes, hair, and then like they had like little choreography, and all of a sudden it was, boom, like it was just like the narrative embodied, right? The nation power of the film was embodied. And it wasn't even embodied just through their heads. It was through their active, like their physical body that was embodied and will still be embodied. And then if you look in the film, you think about different African cultures that were shown, and the fact that kind of going into like the way, I know you'll touch on rituals, but like just like the way in which like that was shown, especially to black people in the States, right? Not necessarily, and especially going into like. It's like overlapping with things. I'm trying to stick to mine. Jesus, but it just goes into so many overlapping themes that like you just can't sit down and like eat one thing without eating something else. So that was something that was really important. And then you also really see the power in like Ryan, the director, and how he chose Claw and Everett, which was the two white men that were in the film. So like the one was the one who was like, he was like the evil guy, and the other one, he was like the one who was how he was shaped in the film. He was like he was there for agency, right? He was there to help black people get the story. So like even, sorry, spoiler alert, but like even the part where he so like a devastating event happened. I'm gonna try not to spoil it for y'all. Devastating event happened, and all of a sudden the mother rushed in, and she was like, we gotta go. And he was looking at them like he didn't know what to do, but then they threw him the cloth, and then he went with them, right? And then like at the end where he had experience being a pilot, and so like they said that King Shuri was like, look, I'm gonna give you one job, don't mess it up, right? And he said, no questions. So it kind of like you just saw that, and it wasn't like white bodies being embodied, right? It was the fact that they were helping, which is in a lot of times in history you see black people in film helping white people get the story across. So it was something that was very particular, that was like really outstanding. So that's just a little spiel. Yeah.
Thanks. That's it?
Yeah, just a little spiel.
Wow. Well, I want to just briefly touch on when you talk about black women, and if there were to be a film with a black woman protagonist, I definitely think it's possible because what I think what happened with this film is that it has allowed for Black women to participate in Black comics as blurs, as geeks, as also cosplay. And I think that makes what Hollywood and what Marvel has done and tapped into, and may not know that they had tapped into it, with a lot of Black women who are into comics. And they missed that audience previously. And now they're like, oh, wait a minute, because they don't realize, like, a lot of Black women, particularly Black families, went to see the movie because of Black mothers. So the Black family was all a part of that, and we saw Black people dressing up and participating in cosplay. So I think that is a stream and a possible journal. I was hoping some Black scholar would pick that up and start run with it, like a Black women in cosplay, and how that has opened a space for Black women to come out, technically of the closet, of the common closet. I want to talk briefly about rites and rituals and African versus African American. I think what you were saying, I know you want to talk about rites and rituals. But I think it's important why we talked about why Africa and the diaspora are very excited about this film is because they see a positive representation of themselves post-Trump's comments what he made about the Caribbean and Cuba and African countries. So Africans, and if those who have ever been to Africa or been to any of the countries in Africa, you would see that African people have an identity, and they're like, we have resources, and we are not these monkeys or whatever you want to call us. Like, they have agency, and also they have intelligence, and that they have created their own powers and hierarchies and rituals and all these other things that we participate in that we have lost here in America as the Black Americans, unfortunately, through the diaspora. And I think that what the film is hoping to translate is that how important rituals are for African people and how we have gotten lost and how those rituals mean something towards them, especially when it comes to rites and rituals from manhood and to womanhood. Which is what we see, and also with the connection to the ancestors. And I think a lot of times we tend to not play into those types of roles and stereotypes here in the States. I was talking to some other people who, another panel, we were talking about, having ancestral visits from those who have passed on and transitioned, and how they come back and help us to shape and narrate and move into other places in our lives. The fact that the colonizer cannot participate in the ritual shows a key part of why those rituals are sacred. But it also lets us, as the viewer, participate. And I don't know if people recognize that we, as the viewer, are participating in something that the colonizer was not able to participate in. So we had access to something that's very privy and special to us as Black people. That's something I think they want to translate through the film of how do we connect back to those rituals that are part of who we are inherently as Black people. And then, of course, we're talking about Christianity versus, we do have rituals of those of you who are Christian. Yes, we all participate in the Eucharist, the blood of Christ, and you take the bread and you drink the wine. But that is not the type of ancestral rite that we're talking about when it comes to African rituals. So we have to keep that into context. And also the transition from boyhood to adulthood, which a lot of times we as African Americans do not have that, particularly African American males. How do we transition from boys into men? And I think the African rituals help to translate how we transition, particularly for Black Panther, T'Challa. The fact that he has to go back and he has this conversation with his father who helps him to translate and how he communicates his own manhood and identity. Then I think it's also the importance of remembering. And I think we forget that as well, that we have this access to when T'Challa and his mother and his sister, when they're at the Mbuku, the other tribe. And the fact is that there's an intergenerational happening there. There's the mother and the daughter, and they're both participating in the ritual. So the fact that we see this intergenerational, because the mother has never forgotten the ritual, she knows how to do it, even though she is the queen, she still knows how to do the ritual. The daughter knows how to do it as well because she's been trained, she's always been present at the ritual functionings. So I think that is important that we have to remember as intergenerational things that we move forward. How do we pass these on to our young people so that they can translate them and that we can help keep this movement going, especially around rituals and ritualizations. And I'll stop there because I won't go into Africans and African Americans. Is that okay? Okay.
Well, do you want to do African?
No, I need to stop because my mouth is dry.
Oh, did you want to speak? Yeah, I'd like to speak to, I'd like to continue the point you're making about rituals, because I think there is a struggle between tradition and modernity in the film, like throughout the film, where we have vibranium used not only to make powerful weapons, but also to heal. I mean, we get this nod to traditional herbs in the film. We're given a glance of the utopia that seems possible when the film gives us a glance of the peace and tranquility of the village, and vibranium is the source of scientific technology on the other end of the spectrum. So the question posed in the film that is really not successfully or satisfactorily answered to me at any point is, what should the role of tradition be in determining the right usage of science and technology and these kinds of advancements? So after the film credits, that first set pass, we have what looks like a UN kind of gathering in Takala, and is accompanied there by one of the women in the film, or two, maybe two, and there's a question put to them. The question is, what does Wakanda have to offer to the rest of the world? So, and then it ends. I mean, there's no sort of answer to that question. So is it more weapons? Is it more hover trains and driverless cars? Nakia is a humanitarian. Mbaku clings to tradition in the mountains. The village elders and medicine men and herbalists are there. There's this struggle, I think, between modernity and tradition that is not completely played out in the film. And if the filmmakers make any mistake, I think it's really that. Even though some of, as I said before in my earlier comments, that some of the progressive and radical voices in Twitter seems to think that they also made a mistake regarding looking more favorably upon the possibilities of a Pan-African revolution that frees all oppressed people of the world.
But doesn't Du Bois and the Souls of Black Folk ask that same question? What does the Black have to offer to America?
Right.
So basically, we see history repeating itself with the same question.
Right.
What does Wakanda have? Like, what does the African continent have to offer? Yet, Du Bois already posed that question nearly over a century ago. Are you trying to hold the mic? You're going to be over, be over.
So are you saying?
Let's open it up to the audience.
You say
Yes.
that question resonates?
Yes.
Oh.
Of what does the Black have to, because Du Bois posed that question in the beginning of Souls for Black Folk, which is why he's answering and responding. What do Blacks have to contribute to America, to white society? And then he has to go through this litany of all the cultural things that we have already contributed. Like, we don't have to, we don't have to prove anything.
Thank you so much. Your comments are beautiful and I love it. To your point about women protagonists, there are a couple of things that I mentioned before, and Dr. Jackson and I were just talking. I am a flirt, I suppose. And so I've been following Marvel relatively closely. And one of the things I will do is try to answer a few of the things that you guys spoke to rather concisely. So one of the things in terms of what is yet to be seen in terms of will we see a black woman protagonist, and we'll answer the question that you just posed, Dr. Jackson, is that first of all, Child is going to have a sequel. And the first sequel that we're going to see is coming out relatively soon, right? So at the end of April, we're going to see Infinity War, and we're going to immediately see what Wakanda has to offer the world as they team up with the Avengers to save it from the apocalyptic event, right? Because there's not going to be a way that the Avengers are able to carry out a defense against Thanos without Wakanda, right? So there's that immediate answer to that question there. Interestingly enough, Disney and Marvel have recently bought back the rights to the X-Men including Storm. I am wondering then, particularly because in one of the story arcs that Storm and T'Challa are married, are we going to see a Storm film? And then so here's why I think they teased it. One of the things that they teased in the theaters to go see Black Panther is the Wasp and Ant-Man. They are coming together in the film, right? I'm thinking really hard that they are going to give me Storm, and they don't look like that. And I like to leave me out of it's not wrong. But they keep like this somewhere, sit down, because I'm going to see it with my eyes. They gave us a cartoon which BET recently just got back in, because it used to be on YouTube. There's a 6-episode cartoon where the child is voiced by John Hansu, Storm is voiced by Jill Scott. I mean, it's really kind of like an all-star cast there. And I think Alfred Wood is Ramonda. It's a really all-star cast. They only ran for 6 episodes, and they snatched it all off of the internet once they got the rights back from Wesley Snipes. So Black Panther, they knew that they were going to kind of follow the story arc in that way. So I'm wondering, and I'm being speculative here, what we're going to see with Storm. Whether she gets a title film of her own and is kind of integrated into the Wakanda universe, or she's given a film of her own, kind of as a prequel to the new way that they're taking the X-Men story. To your point about ritual, though, I'm interested in that question as somebody who's located in the United States, and my own work is on Afro-Atlantic religion and popular culture. And I was immediately struck by like, by the way, T. So Forrest Whitaker is a Babalawo, right? Which is not common information, but is not a secret either. So like if you know that, then you know that. If you don't know that, you don't even know what you're looking at. So I just thought it was interesting the role that he occupied in that film. I was like, you're not slick, Forrest. And you're also not slick that you're sneaking this real stuff in either. Which I thought was super interesting. But in terms of ritualization, in terms of what you're mentioning, Terrence, I'm interested in the ways in which even African Americans are interested in drawing these discrete lines about what's ritual and what's not ritual, what we forgot and what we don't have, as somebody who practices an Atlantic version of an African religion, right? Which is really interesting, right? And that's a very specific thing, but there are things that Black people do that are absolutely directly tied to what it is that I do, and they don't even know that that is a thing. They don't even know. They're not even registering that that is ritual, right? So I think sometimes even in conversation around, I'm not even going to touch on the Pan-African thing because it makes me tired. But even as you start to talk about ritual and what is and what is not ritual, I love what you said about the fact that the viewers are even participants in the ritual, right? And when Mbaku made him turn around, what a scene. But would you speak more about, the idea of like making delineations about what is ritual, what is not ritual, what about African American rituals, make them less salient than what we're reading as African? Is that even the message of the film? Because even, Killmonger has that right in his lip. He has a name, right? And so he must have gone through at least some beginning stages of ritualized indoctrination into Wakanda society to have been given the name N'Jaka, to have that ring. I'm sure that Njoku initiated him in some kind of way. And it's Njoku telling that story in the beginning. So we already see him being indoctrinated into Wakanda culture in a ritual fashion, even if it isn't with the sacred herb or whatever that, is being, I'm sorry.
So, Terrence, do you want to speak to this issue?
Yeah. So, as you're right, so I've been to South Africa a number of times, and so South Africans argue there are traditional South Africans who are very traditional with traditional religion, and how South Africans should be practicing traditional religion. There are the modern South Africans who live in Johannesburg. I use Johannesburg and Cape Town because those are places I frequent mostly. And those who live in the bigger city, so Joburg is the bigger city, Cape Town is the bigger city. So those who grew up in Joburg and Cape Town are Christians. And so what happens is that when they go home, and they go back home to the countryside or to the villages where they originally come from, they realize when they go back home, they have lost a lot of their cultural African, traditional African religion connections, and their parents and their grandparents are reminding them, telling them, it's because you have become more modernized. And so now there's this argument for a lot of the young people to go back to traditional African religions because they want to negate it. Well, they want to get away from Western and Westernized ideas, Westernized religion. And there's a new movement in the throughout the continent through the universities and the colleges to do away with Westernized theory. They want to create their own theory because they said we don't want to be theorized through a white lens. So we see this movement that is happening, is what you're talking about, this traditionalist versus the non-traditionalists. Even as we use in America, those who come here and they say, well, I'm going to go back and I want to use Yoruba or the other traditions of the traditional African religions. And I realizing that they have been colonized so much that they have been, something's happened in the midst of it that we have diluted the practice of it. Because we are colonized, so we do this westernized version of our African religion because, as we know through slavery, we were not permitted to actually participate and have our own religion. So once that's been whitewashed, literally whitewashed, that we find ourselves actually practicing a white colonized version of some type of African religion. How does that translate now to where we are today? I think where we are very diluted in how we are practicing. And I think there is this push. I don't know if you all read Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother. Have you all read that or heard of it? So Saidiya Hartman wrote a text called Lose Your Mother, and the text is about her visits to Ghana. She goes back, she talks about how we as African American people romanticize Africa as the motherland. She goes to Ghana because she thinks she's going to have this Ghanaian experience and she's going to be welcomed back and she's going to be like, welcome back, sister. We know we've missed you. But she gets there and she realizes that a lot of Ghanaians are like, we didn't experience slavery in the same way that you're talking about. And they have no connection to it. So what they do is that they have capitalized on it because a lot of Americans go back looking for this diasporic experience of, I'll get there and my spirit will be reformed and renewed and I'll be awakened and, reconnected back to motherland. And so the Ghanaians are like, okay, we'll perform, we'll dress up like how you want to. So it becomes more capitalized. So there is this huge disconnect in how we romanticize Africa. And I think that's why it has penetrated Black Panther for so many Africans in Africa and through Brazil and through the Caribbean, because they realize we are a very unique and diverse people. And it is what we should. And if you have not gone, I always encourage my students, please go to Africa. Visit the Caribbean, visit those sites, visit those places, those locales, and try to reconnect those places for your own self. Because there is something very spiritual in it that you can get out of it. But I also recognize that there is some dilution that's happened to it because we have now capitalized on these types of things. Because even when I go to South Africa, it's all for pay. Whatever you can pay to get this experience that you African Americans want to come here and get, we'll sell it to you.
Other questions from the audience or comments?
It's more of a comment, but maybe somebody can touch on it. I think President Dean kind of talked about it. Something that I thought was interesting, kind of going back to this aspect of like tradition versus modern, is like when we first see M'Baku, he comes to like challenge T'Challa, and the first thing he says, which just like struck me, was like, we're letting first T'Challa's little sister, this young girl, like technologically advance our country, and he like basically criticizes her because he's like, you guys are so consumed in this new technology, what happened to our tradition? Like, what happened to, like, the old way? So, like, I guess this idea of, like, tradition versus modernizing, and, like, how that, like, even fares today in society, how, like, we're so technology advanced, or we're getting more technology advanced today, but then you have people who grew up in a time that didn't have technology, and what that means for them. So it's kind of like, M'Baku is like, to me, he was like an embodiment of like the old way. And so, and like this new era with Siri, she's like the new age technology, like, you know, people coming out the womb with iPads and stuff like that. And so like, I just like wanted to like talk about, even like comment on the idea of like new versus old and what that means today.
If I can take a crack at it just for a second. For me, the genie is out of the bottle, right? I mean, technology is there, you can never put it back, we can sort of never go back. So the question is, what should be that relationship, especially if one seeks to recover the past or to remember what the past gave to us? Are we connected to it in any way? Are there ways for us to recover any part of it? And then what should that relationship be? Well, it seems to me that if one looks at it from a kind of postmodern point of view, that one would sort of break down these categories of modernity and tradition and find some way where one mixes them in a hybrid way. And perhaps it is the case that there are some ways of doing things, ways of thinking, ways of knowing, values and perspectives from the past that can inform a kind of right, quote unquote, usage of technology. That now it would seem that technological advancement is advancing for its own sake, but can we direct that towards some nobler purposes, perhaps found in traditions of the past? Other comments or questions?
I have a question, just a comment. I'm interested in international relations, international politics. So the thing that really struck me about Black Panther was seeing even if it's fictional, an African nation that is not only stable but also powerful, and also it really contrasts against a lot of the images that we not only see in fiction but also in reality. We don't often see African nations that they're not presented as stable or powerful. They're usually going through ethnic conflict. They're going through dictatorships, or they're just going through regime changes like in North Africa. So that's something that was really powerful about Black Panther, was seeing a stable and politically powerful nation.
Thank you. That's... Yeah, it's in the
I
back.
think this is also a comment, but in terms of the line of thought about kind of reflecting the past and how to move forward. So I saw the film for the second time this past week, and I think when I watched it the first time, I was really just drawn into the plot and kind of everything that was happening there. But watching it the second time, I noticed a lot of ways that they slipped in kind of different cultural references from, I think, one of the first scenes, they're in the apartment in California, and on the TV they're showing police violence. And then in a further scene when he goes to kind of try to get Nakia to come back with him, that to me kind of emulated what happened with the girls who were kidnapped from the school in Africa. So that was really like, you know, and to see a female who's kind of going undercover from this more powerful country to try to like fix that. I'm trying to think when Eric Killmonger dies and he kind of makes that comment about how he would rather die. He wants to be buried in the ocean, you know, like his ancestors did. He doesn't want to kind of be free if he's not going to actually be free. I just really appreciated watching it a second time and noticing kind of all the details that the director and the production team put in that kind of reference real life events that have happened in the past, you know, while also portraying this utopia in a way that shows how, you know, this culture has become powerful in different parts in the future.
Thank you. I think there was one hand here, yes.
I just wanted to comment about Killmonger and the comes back to Wakanda with the aim of taking charge and fixing things in the light but he didn't grow up there. And I think that's like a recurring narrative here. I think this was discussed on the panel, how African Americans living here grew up with this idealized thing of what's going on in Africa and going back to Africa with the aim that they'll bring maybe the things they learned and the good things to improve the land and maybe Africa or wherever the country they go to in Africa. But the reality is that growing up, coming back, it's not the same as actually living there and growing up, and maybe the welcome you'd expect is not what you'd actually probably receive.
Any comments?
So that's like really interesting. I guess like we can go into like the African and African American. So well, Killmonger. So like it was evident in the film that so he learned how to read, right? He learned how to speak it. So he grew up reading the text. And he knew about the betrayal of his father, and he joined like military, like he was all these things, and like he was able to conjure up some vibranium. So it's like all of these things that kind of go into like the person that he is. You look in the apartment, and it was like very revolutionary black figures on that were like around the apartment, and also like kind of like the embodiment of like what he thought the representation of Africa was. You saw like cloth, you saw different fabrics there, which is a lot of times what a lot of black people in the States, like we try to really fabricate what it is to really embody our own, what it is to embody our culture, and that doesn't mean us. But if you know right where you come from, the specific country, but if anything, it's black people trying to embody the whole continent, right? So you see that, right? But it's just because my lineage goes back to Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. That's what I know, right? Like I'm not paying for, that's what we know. So we try to embody that. So you see that with Killmonger, and then you see that with his father when he tells his father tells his brother that this is a horrible condition right here. We need help, and and we saw that. And so then like Killmonger comes, you can see like the distinction from when he comes there, and then his auntie, right? Hey auntie, like she just like she calls him out. She calls him an outsider. You know what I'm saying? Everybody like imposter. But his father is of royal blood. But the fact that you have an inch, like a little smudge of American blood in your system, that you are outsider, right? Even though he comes there with this very revolutionary intention, even though it's like it's toxic, like it wasn't strategic, right? His plan wasn't strategic, but he came there and he fantasized, and he was just like, he had anger. He was like, y'all been here this whole time, and we can be freeing people, we can be killing people left and right. You know what I'm saying? Like this is what we need to do. That's what he was about, but like he wasn't strategic. So you see that that disconnect between that kind of like the stigma you see with black people in the States and the people of African descent who exactly know where they come from, and as far as people you not being too black enough or not being too African enough, where can you fit in between? And at one point is my authenticity, what does my authenticity have to be so I can be a part of this group? So you see that, if anything, you see that in so many different cultures, not even just in cultures that where we're all essentially African. So it's just a really interesting dynamic.
I just want to add to that what you were saying, that Killmonger and T'Challa, Wakanda is a class-based society that we have not even addressed yet, because you have to realize they're all privileged. They have access to something that the rest of Africa does not have. And I think Isabella, who's in my class, said, it's interesting that we have T'Challa and Black Panther, and we have Wakanda that exists in Africa, yet they did not help any other African countries, even though they have access to do so. But T'Challa makes a very good point. He says, I'm the king of Wakanda. I'm not the king of the world. So he's already made a choice, and his conflict is, and his dilemma is that he has to be king of Wakanda. Killmonger challenges him by saying, wait a minute, like you said, you have the power and ability to change the world and help people who have come through the diaspora and those brothers and sisters who are over there who are trapped, and you have not done anything about it? So we have the black revolutionaries, you said, Dr. Jackson. But what happens to black revolutionaries in America? We have to really take that into consideration, which is why we haven't seen a black revolutionary come forth again. I don't think black men are willing to put themselves on the front line to be killed, like MLK, Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers, and all the other black revolutionaries. Because there's something at risk and there's something at stake, especially for black life, especially we see it now with Black Lives Matter.
Robert, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I have a question for you, it's Panther.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious of your response to Dr. Jackson's reference to sort of redeeming technology as it relates to tradition. And I'll put in context my question. One of the things that I've often said with regard to the gospel, how it gets contextualized in each generation. So, you create sort of a theological way of being, a liturgy, the church sort of embodies what they think the gospel, tries to represent the gospel in their particular generation. And what I've watched now, I've lived long enough to see, the transition from the builders to the boomers to the Gen Xers, all the way down to the millennials. And I've often said that each generation has the responsibility of contextualizing the gospel for their generation. So the question goes to, he's pointing to this technology and how it may be redeemed. So I'm curious, with your theological perspective, whether or not you feel the same way.
That about the religion and
whether or not see, the traditions. So the point is that there is an essence of the gospel that transcends generation, right? They're reality. However, it gets tainted by how it gets contextualized, and each generation's you need to practice religion the way I practice it for my generation. There's real evidence between the builders and the boomers. Jesus movement versus. So you get where I'm coming from. So I'm just curious about how you see, whether you see the embrace of technology as represented as being a potentially good thing, or where you see how it might be redeemed given history, given the traditions of the past. If that makes sense.
it does. I think there are those who are very traditionalists when it comes to religion, particularly black religion, that our elders want to hold on to a certain type of Jesus. And as you said, the new millennials, and it's interesting because I find out a lot of new millennials don't even go to church. So, but I realized, so the two things. So first thing is that I discovered is that young people of color attend church virally through their smartphones. So they don't have to go through a whole sermon. It's like I can just listen to a sermon I can listen to T.D. Jakes' 30-minute gospel, whatever he wants to say. I can get a tweet from him, 140 characters. I got my word for the day. We see how technology is infusing within. So I think what's happening now is that preachers are trying to figure out or the church is trying to figure out how do we connect to those millennials to get them back into the church. So they're using technological advances to try to do that. But there is a failure because you can't do the Eucharist or perform the Eucharist virtually. Like there is something about community and something about being in the presence, And also there's about Pentecostalism, those who are Pentecostal. Like if you've never had the Holy Spirit come in and everybody shouting and preaching and falling out, that's an experience that you can't get virtually. There is something that gets lost. I think what happens too, T.D. Jakes made a comment, and I thought that's where the dynamic falls. They were talking, this was in the 90s, when HIV and AIDS had hit the black community. And this is on 2020, ABC News did a special on black AIDS in America. And they were talking to all these black progressive preachers, T.D. Jakes, Abyssinian Baptist Church, what am I trying to think of his name?
Yeah.
Okay. They asked T.D. Jakes, how come the black church has been so slow to respond to HIV/AIDS? His response was, because there's not a scripture on it. Paul did not leave us a scripture on how to deal with HIV/AIDS. That goes to show you those who are traditionalists who live by the word, the very word of the gospel. The fact that he didn't know how to translate a gospel or a word to make it fit for our modern world, the man shows that there is a lack within the community or conversation intergenerationally of how the church has not moved. So there is a big, huge gap that we need to, and there is some advancements that we're trying to work on, but technology is moving so fast, we don't have those who are traditionalists, who want to keep the word of God as it is. Because you have like Jamal Bryant and all these others who are like, we preach the word of God as is, as it's biblically written. And they're not going to stray from that. And the black community is suffering because of that.
Yeah, I'm going to take some prerogative and make a final comment going back to this question about the right strategy for a revolution. It seems to me that the militants of the 1960s understood something that we don't fully understand, and that we misunderstood them regarding. That is that revolutions aren't always violent. There are other ways to have revolutions, that oppression isn't always held in place by guns and arms, but there are other forms of coercion. And so in our modern, in the 1960s, there was this phrase, free your mind, and you guys know how and what else would follow, right? And so the point is that maybe there's an imperialism of the mind today as well as then, and that we are blinded to the instruments of our oppression. We're blinded to those real causes of our imprisonment. And I like what happened, toward the end of the film, where M'Baku, says, bury me with the ancestors in the ocean. Killmonger says that because rather die with them than live in bondage. And I think the question is whether or not emancipation freed us, whether or not the civil rights movement freed us, whether or not diversity and inclusion frees us, and to what extent we're falling short in analyzing the roots and foundations of our oppression, and then imagining ways that we can break the chains. Yeah.
I want to
Okay.
thank all of our